Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. Many thanks for joining us today. You're all very welcome. My name is Thomas Caffrey Oswald, and I'm Small Foundation's Networks and Systems Lead. I look forward to moderating today's discussion. For those of you who don't know us, Small Foundation is a family foundation based in Dublin in Ireland. We have a mission to catalyse income-generating opportunities for people living in extreme poverty in rural sub-Saharan Africa. We believe this is possible by expanding the access of rural impacting micro, small and medium-sized enterprises to knowledge, skilled human resources, finance, technology and markets. Today, we'll be exploring geomapping technology and particularly considering the opportunities that exist in using it to extend access to finance for smallholder farmers. Small Foundation has been interested in exploring this topic for some time, and together with Palladium, we're delighted to be launching the report, A Paradigm Shift in Lending to Smallholder Farmers, the Potential of Geomapping. We are eager to better understand the barriers to adoption of this technology in the market, as well as understanding the opportunities that exist in this space. Importantly for us in Small Foundation, we were eager to understand the systemic change that a technology like geomapping could offer and how we collectively shape and understand this space. I'm delighted that Erin Layson from Palladium will be presenting a distilled version of the report shortly, which will be followed by a panel discussion and an opportunity for questions and answers. Before we start, I just put out some notes on housekeeping before we begin. We're recording this webinar and we'll circulate a link to the recording together with a copy of the report and the contact details for those on today's panel. We encourage you to reach out to us if you don't get a chance to answer your questions. And we have a Q&A function in the Zoom channel below. And we'd encourage you all to enter your questions there. Please make sure to include your name, your organization, and to whom the question is aimed at. Many thanks. Before I hand over to Erin and the Palladium team to share the results of the research, and as the final attendees filter in, I thought we could start today's sessions with a few questions related to today's topic. We'll give these questions about a minute and we'll share the results. Gwen, could I ask you to launch the first poll question, please? Thanks. I think we can see the results of the first poll, and the correct answer is 90%. In 2020, the Sustainable Trade Initiative and CGAP estimated that 90% of smallholder farmers were unable to access financing. I think this shows the challenge that geomapping technology and which intermediaries are looking to integrate this technology face in extending finance to smallholders. We have a second poll question. And that I think we can launch that now. And I think we have the results. And about half of you were right. In 2019, it was estimated that smallholder financing gap totaled $170 billion. Again, I think this speaks to the quantum of the opportunity that exists for both tech providers and intermediaries in exploring potential solutions in this space. Now we have one final poll question, which I'd ask Gwen just to launch now. Thanks. And as we can see from the results there, most people have suggested that all of the above, all of these challenges represent a considerable barrier to adoption of geospatial technology. And as we'll be discussing today, our study shows that all of these challenges are faced in the adoption of geomapping technology. Erin from Palladium will be sharing more about the research which she's led on the opportunities which geomapping technology can afford in extending access to smallholder farmers. Thank you all for participating in the polls. Before we hand over to Erin to present the research, I wanted to introduce our panel with whom I'll be picking up a conversation after the presentation. As already mentioned, Erin is a senior associate in Palladium's Natural Resource Facilities practice and served as the research lead on this report. At Palladium, Erin collaborates with executives from diverse industries to formulate strategies for sustainable social and economic impact. Erin was previously employed in both the private and nonprofit sector, with a focus on political and economic development projects in the US and Mexico, including consulting for McKinsey & Company, as well as founding Incuba ONG, a Mexico City-based consultancy that provides strategic planning services to multilateral organizations, private foundations, and nonprofits in Latin America. Erin holds a BA in public policy from Duke University and an MPA with a focus on economic development from Columbia University School for International and Public Affairs. Also joining us today is Oliver Mundy. Oliver is a consultant with IFAD, where he designs and monitors climate adaptation measures across IFAD projects, supports an online learning program to secure tenure rights through participatory methods and geomatics, as well as supporting IFAD's efforts in integrating GIS into its M&E systems. On top of this, Oliver also facilitates IFAD's community of practice for geospatial applications. Prior to his work in IFAD, Oliver worked on pastoralism at the FAO, conducted research on agrobiodiversity in Kenya, and practiced conservation farming in Lesotho. Oliver holds degrees in geography and environmental management. We're also delighted to have Jitesh Shah, the Chief Revenue Officer at Cropin, joining us today. Cropin is one of the agricultural technology companies featured in our research. At Cropin, Jitesh leads the company's sales and business development and client operations. Jitesh has played a key role in the organization's year-on-year revenue growth, and under his leadership, the organization has expanded its presence to nearly 40 countries. Jitesh holds a Bachelor's of Engineering in Electronics and Communication from Andhra University and a Master's in Electrical and Electronics Engineering from Clemson University. Last but certainly not least is Bruce Cameron from the US Development Finance Corporation, the development finance institution of the US government. Bruce has worked at DFC and its predecessor OPIC for over 25 years across a wide range of sectors and countries. Prior to joining DFC, Bruce worked for McDermott International, a multinational energy services company, on issues ranging from power project development to government energy contracts. Bruce holds an MBA and a professional architecture degree from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. Now, before we start the presentation, I'll take this opportunity to remind you all to pop your questions into the Q&A function. And with that, I invite Erin to share her presentation on the potential of geomapping and lending to smallholder farmers. Erin, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you everyone for being here with us today. From Palladium, we're very excited to share the research as well as share the floor with our amazing panelists and really get into a discussion about geomapping, especially as it relates to helping smallholder farmers access more finance. So let me bring up my presentation and I will go through an overview of what we did for our study. and then we'll take questions at the end and speak to Thomas and our panelists about it. So our study, once again, is called A Paradigm Shift in Lending to Smallholder Farmers, the Potential of Geomapping. This is a journey that we began in July of last year, and we are continuing to move on that journey, which you'll see in this presentation. And we're very passionate about this problem and looking at how we can help more smallholder farmers access financing. So to start from the beginning, we got passionate about this problem because we see the smallholder financing challenge as one of a gap. Smallholder finance is very difficult to access for smallholder farmers. However, they are demanding it because they're looking for finance to improve their on-farm production as well as to invest in their land. What we see is that there is a $170 billion gap in the smallholder farmer financing area. If anyone got that right in the poll, good job. You're all experts out there, or you're learning today. So now you know the answer. And what we see is that financial institutions are reluctant to lend to smallholder farmers because they often don't have access to the tools that would help them monitor and assess their risk. So they're nervous about extending that type of financing. They're uncertain about whether extending financing to smallholder farmers will really improve their bottom lines or improve their operations. And so, as Thomas was saying at the top of the webinar, 90% of smallholder farmers remain unable to access financing. And so for our study, what we set out to do was validate and explore a hypothesis about the power of geomapping. And what we saw is that geomapping is such a powerful tool. We wanted to know why more people in the smallholder farmer space were not using it. So our hypothesis is that geomapping will expand access to affordable financing for smallholder farmers by allowing intermediaries to visualize loans in space, and by way of this, monitor them more accurately so that they can identify patterns and reduce risk. And when they can do this, we believe that that will motivate more lending to this sector. Our objectives for the study were twofold. Number one, map the geomapping ecosystem, understand who the players are, who's using it, who's developing the technologies, and what are the barriers to scale for all of the players. And two, identify ways that intermediaries' use of geomapping can be increased in order to expand SHF financing. And before we move on, two definitions that are really key to our study. Number one, geomapping. We see that as the process of collecting information about location and using it to assemble a map. There are many ways this type of information can be collected. We saw providers doing it with a handheld rugged GPS, with drones, with satellite imagery, with working with farmers to drop a pin on a map to show where their land is. So we saw a wide variety of geomapping implementations as well as tools, but that's how we're thinking of geomapping for our study. And then an intermediary. You'll hear us use this phrase. You'll see it throughout the study later on today when you can download it. But we see an intermediary as any institution that has the potential to deliver financing to a smallholder farmer. So this might be a microfinance institution. It could be a commercial bank. It could be an agribusiness, a startup, an insurance company that specializes in smallholder farmers. So many different types of institutions that can extend financing, which we're grouping under the term intermediary. And then a little bit about our methodology, how we developed the study. So again, as I was saying, we started in July of 2021. We did a literature review. We mapped the ecosystem, understanding who are the different types of players here. We came down to tech providers who are like people like Croppin that is with us today that provide the technology to implement geomapping and to process the data and really add value to it. And then we also saw that there were intermediaries, as I was saying, microfinance institutions to insurance companies, and then obviously smallholder farmers who are the ultimate beneficiaries here in this value chain of technology. So after we understood who was out there, we found over 100 companies that we mapped. We whittled that down to about 40 companies that really focus on geomapping in the agricultural space, and geomapping is a core business for them. And then we went out and we conducted interviews. We wanted to learn more about these specific tech providers, specific investors in the area, intermediaries. So we conducted 34 interviews and wrote 6 case studies, which you'll be able to see in the study. And then finally work to understand the barriers to scale. Why are people not using geomapping on our wider scale? Why aren't they seeing it as such a promising tool as we do? And finally, we're looking to encourage uptake as our response to this research in a facility that we are designing to think about how we could really help intermediaries increase their use of geomapping, either through funding or through assistance to help them learn more about this technology. So now a few of our key findings that I'll go across the different categories we broke it down into. First is our geomapping data collection. What we see in the data collection is that most of the apps use multiple different sources. They use GPS, they use remote sensing, drones, satellites, even community consultation, and they cross all this data so that they really have an accurate map that they can trust and that they know is validated by several sources. We did see data silos. We see that because there are certain highly scrutinized value chains, there's a lot of data in cocoa and coffee, for example, and little data for macadamia and garbanzos. However, all of the providers we spoke to are crop agnostic, meaning that you can use their technology to monitor a cocoa field versus a garbanzo field in just the same way. Just demand for that information from agribusinesses and final consumers is a little different. For boundary disputes, we asked all of the people that we interviewed how you settle a dispute if there is a dispute about land ownership, since the majority of smallholder farmers do not hold legal land titles. And what we saw there is that they are outsourcing land verification. So if there is a dispute, the tech provider allows whoever's licensing their product to largely work on that and resolve that either with the community or with other types of data that they can use to validate the claim. And finally, labor and use. What we're seeing is that even though there have been many improvements in geomapping technology that have made it much more efficient, it is still a labor-intensive process. Many of the tech providers still employ field extension workers to go out and map farms, but more importantly, to go out and work with farmers who don't often have access to a smartphone or Wi-Fi or a network connection. And so they really do need these farmer support services to be able to get the value add out of these tools. For our technology providers, we zeroed in on 4 key trends. Number one is that super apps and hardcore mappers are dominating the market right now. We defined super apps as vertically integrated, kind of one size fits all, a one-stop shop for farmers, where they are doing market inputs, market information, pricing, weather advisory, mapping, all in one place for farmers that makes it easy for them to get the services they need. And then hardcore mappers, who are the geomapping technology providers that really specialize in mapping a field, either for traceability purposes or for land title purposes. So those are the 2 main types of players that we saw succeeding. We also saw that B2B models are really important, business to business, because that allows geomapping providers to tap into already existing smallholder farmer networks versus go out and talk to different smallholder farmers in remote and often rural areas, which takes a little bit longer. It costs more to send field workers out on motorcycles to remote locations versus working with an agribusiness that already has a collective of farmers with whom they work. Value add for farmers is very important. We saw that all of the apps that we work with and that we interviewed offered value to farmers through either market pricing information, weather advisory, access to finance, to really make sure that farmers are engaged and farmers are benefiting. And finally, no surprise to any of us, was that offline and low bandwidth capabilities are extremely important. We're working in areas that are not connected to Wi-Fi, not connected to a phone network often, and apps that can take in the data and then upload it into the cloud later when the extension worker is on the road, really make the process more efficient and can win out in this space. So finally, some trends that we see across the financing intermediaries is that, number one, there is difficulty to raise funds in this space just because there are few investors that are specifically interested in geomapping. There is, however, appetite for super apps because they are perceived as less risky investments since they are vertically integrating services and depending on fewer partners to deliver services. There is hesitation to launch or expand pilots. What we see in commercial banks especially is that they often have a geomapping pilot working on the ag desk, but that hasn't been scaled up because there's still this uncertainty about whether or not scaling that to more smallholder farmers will really improve the bottom line. And finally, COVID-19. We asked all of our interviewees about how COVID-19 was affecting them and their business, and we saw that there was a reduced interest and a reduced willingness, rather, from intermediaries to pay for information about smallholder farmers, but that revenues are starting to tick up again since late 2021, which is great news for our tech providers as well as smallholder farmers. So now we have the barriers to scale, which was a huge question that we had going into this study. And we grouped them under three main types. Number one, awareness, which is the idea that some players simply are unaware of the value add that geomapping can bring their business, and others are unaware of the way that it can help reduce risks for their business. So they're still reluctant to use it because they're uncertain it will really help improve their bottom line. For funding, we see that there are kind of two sides to the coin here, where we have rural financial institutions that are very much convinced about this case for geomapping, but lack the funding to buy a license or to buy the software and the hardware to digitize their data. And we also see that we have funding in some areas, like at commercial banks, but the awareness is a little lower there. And then finally, with skills and training, we saw that marketing was a huge issue for some of the providers that we talked about, really looking for more people with marketing techniques and marketing expertise that could help them position their tools in front of clients, as well as just having geomapping know-how in a financial intermediary was also very important. That banks are looking for experts that can help them implement this technology in a very low risk way, and many of them feel uncomfortable bringing this technology on since they're not experts in geomapping or technology for that matter. So they're a little more hesitant to adopt such a solution. And these two next slides show just a few of the partners and the people that we worked with that really supported the study and who shared experiences and information with us so that we could learn more about the space. Croppin is here with us today. That's a SaaS solutions company, and they aim to make every farm traceable. They advise financial institutions on credit risk for farmers. And we also spoke with people like SciComp and Yapu, different models. We saw business to customer, business to business. Yapu specifically works with financial institutions. And then we also have some asset trackers like ChipSafer, which is GPS enabled collars to track spatial and health anomalies in cattle, as well as Numerate, which focuses on fish and fisherfolk, helping them to make sure that every trip out to the ocean is productive. And we also spoke with Meridia and Apollo, who taught us about mapping and especially about vertically integrating services. So across all of these players, we found 6 key trends here. Number one is that the majority are operating in Africa. They are super apps or hardcore mappers most often that work offline. And the business to business models are allowing for more scale because it's quicker and the customer acquisition costs are cheaper. And finally, when we talked to these technology providers about how they're financing their endeavors, we saw that there was a mix of self-financing through the business itself, angel investment, grants, and equity investment. So now Palladium's response to all of this research after we explored our hypothesis, we answered our research questions, we only had more questions and more ideas on how to make an impact in this space. And so we thought about how we could really increase geomapping uptake across intermediaries and overcome the barriers that we identified through a geomapping uptake facility, whose purpose would be to increase access to finance for smallholder farmers by increasing the use of geomapping across intermediaries. And we thought that this could look like technical assistance to smaller microfinance institutions maybe that need help to both digitize their data and implement a geomapping solution, but also funding for running pilots and building out proof of concept studies that could really convince some larger intermediaries to move into this space and lend more to smallholder farmers. So here a little bit about our program strategy, which would be to support intermediaries in the uptake of geomapping, either through a technical assistance package or some type of funding that could help them start a pilot or scale a pilot, and ultimately to learn that geomapping really is a promising tool that can help increase lending to smallholder farmers and eventually achieve a sustainable and profitable business lending to smallholder farmers. So we're really excited to launch this report. Today, you will all receive an email with the link to download it, but it will also be on our website, and we'll drop all those links in the chat. Thank you again, Thomas, for kicking us off, and excited to move into the panel discussion.
Thanks, Erin. Appreciate you sharing all of that, and that research is fantastic. And like I said, we're delighted to be able to launch that and look forward to sharing that with the audience today. I might invite the rest of our panel to flick on their cameras and to join us here. And maybe one of the first questions that I wanted to ask, pointed towards you, Bruce, is I feel like the research has really demonstrated an opportunity for geomapping technology to be disruptive to the current system of providing finance to smallholders. Bruce, I think you share that sense of opportunity, but maybe you might share a bit with us why you think that is the case. Why do you think that geomapping technology can create such a systemic shift?
Thanks, Thomas. And Aaron, and I think Aaron's presentation well summarized the possibilities as well as some of the challenges. A couple quick scene setters for me. I'm very interested in this whole arena, as many of you who know me know that I've advocated for this arena. I'm particularly interested in the retail up approach. So being able to get a specific farmer, and particularly using handheld devices where possible with smartphones or GPS devices to be able to get the boundary of the fields. And also, at least initially, I'm not particularly interested in land registration or title using the land as collateral. I think that's a benefit that comes in the mid to long term. And I think another thing to keep in mind is this allows for much better accuracy at an individual farm or portfolio basis, but we're not seeking perfection. We're just seeking much more accuracy across a portfolio. So to your question, I think what this does is, again, we're not going to be perfect on this if it works, but by being more accurate around each borrower, that allows us to have much better accuracy on a portfolio as far as loan performance and to identify performance patterns as well as logistics patterns. So it's both a credit, hopefully a credit enhancement tool, as well as a business management tool, being able to be more efficient as these intermediaries go out to service their borrowers. So, and again, I think for those of us who work at development finance institutions and foundations, work with these intermediaries, we have to use a portfolio approach, and we need to know that the information there can be more accurate for better sifting of the patterns of performance. So that's why I'm particularly interested in this arena.
Thanks, Bruce, and great to get the conversation off to a good start. Jitesh, I was wondering if I might be able to turn to you. I thought one of the most interesting findings from the research was the perceived low level of awareness of financial intermediaries that were included in the study about the potential of geomapping technology and its application, particularly to agricultural portfolios. Maybe you could share a little bit about how Croppin has worked with financial intermediaries to build their understanding of the potential of geomapping.
Thank you so much for that, Thomas, and great job, Erin, in terms of demonstrating the depth of the study that you have done. Croppin as an organization, we've been around for 11 years. We've created an impact for 7 million farmers in almost 50 plus countries now. And we work across 16 million hectares of land. And the crops that we've been able to digitize on our platform are about 400 crops, right? Now, that has given us significant data points and signatures of crops, almost to the tune of 2 trillion data sets, which allows us to train our AI and ML models to be able to do a lot more predictive analysis. So as we work with financial institutions that are predominantly in the business of offering credit to the smallholder farmers, this becomes very, very significant, because if you think about it for a second, everyone on the call, probably except me, has a great credit score. Farmers, on the other hand, do not and especially the smallholder farmers, do not necessarily have a credit score. Okay. So that becomes a great concern, if you will, when a farmer goes to a financial institution and asks $100 to grow watermelon. So what agri-tech companies and some of the new age innovators are able to provide through this GIS mapping and the geotagging of the farms is if I'm able to demonstrate. So Cropin as an organization, if I'm able to demonstrate to some of the financial credit providers around the world, is this piece of land, and I'm not talking about the farmer now, right? Now I'm talking about the parcel of land. Is this farmland capable of growing watermelon? So historically, has this farmland grown watermelon? Yes, no. And if yes, typically what has the value of the yield been? So now all of a sudden, I am able to provide the agri-worthiness of a farmland, and that becomes a great input variable to the underwriting desk of a financial institution. So while the farmer may not necessarily have a credit score, the underwriting team at the financial institution knows what is the value, historical value of that farmland, and basis that they can then factor in whether or not money should be lent, thus disrupting the entire cycle of a farmer not getting money, and because of that the farmer not being able to innovate, because of that farmer not even being able to get the best seed and best chemicals, and hence his productivity not coming up. So the moment you're able to solve that problem, the whole disintermediation of the system occurs, and as a result of that, the entire industry sees almost, for example, in developing nations, for a fact, we are seeing almost a 30 to 40% improvement in productivity just by basic measures coming in, including advisory services, right? So as a result of all of this, that if we are able to do, then we are talking of a humongous impact.
Thanks, Jitesh. That's great insight and great that you can share that with us. Oliver, I was thinking, the report has identified a number of trends in the geomapping data collection area. This is the use of multi-source collection, data silos, challenges in boundary disputes, just to mention a few. Could you share maybe how this tallies with your experience in IFAD and its use of geomapping technology?
No, thanks, Thomas. And let me first start. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I read the report with a great interest, and I was surprised to see that there's so many actors in this field. And I was also surprised to see that there's so many diverse approaches undertaken. I agree with many of the trends and the challenges that your study highlighted. Maybe one of the things that I can really support is the awareness regards to this technology, what I would also call like GIS literacy. So it's also my job to bridge let's say the geospatial world with the development world. And I've also been in the case where GIS providers have been talking to our experts and saying, so what do you need? And they gave us questionnaires down to the bandwidth of a satellite that you need that you need to fill in. And then the question was more like with a counter question. So what do you offer? So this is one of these areas where there's still a lot of awareness that has to be created. Reaching our end users the farmers is quite it's a difficult target group. There are many producers that were organized. There's a lot of scope to increase productivity. Digital literacy is poor. The field level data is also difficult to get. One thing that IFAD programs I'm also specifically trying to tackle is our land tenure issues and land disputes. So we also see this as a major challenge. And then one thing that also is also in terms of data literacy, GIS literacy, is if you have a point, so georeferencing per se is not that difficult, but giving information to that point, that's quite the challenge, depending whatever it is. So for example, if you want to measure impact, you need to attribute information to this one specific point. So this data not only has to be georeferenced, but also quality text, standardized. It has to be analysis ready in order to add value. And so here our projects are trying to tackle this problem. Reaching out to farmers is also critical. So I agree that many agents are needed in farm organizations in order to reach out to the farmers. One issue that I thought that would play a bigger role would be the usage of open source software and data. So I would assume that many of the technology providers would build their services on them. And so the assumption would be that better the open source situation, the data is, the better the services and the more accurate the service will be. So the more freely accessible data sets there are, so free satellite imagery, population maps, land use maps, so the more information can be attributed to a certain point. So it will be more interesting to explore this more. Over to you.
Thanks, Oliver. That's great, and I think that actually leads us very nicely into our next question, which is maybe back to you, Aaron. In addition to kind of finance, smallholder farmers obviously have other requirements to increase their incomes, including access to markets, crop spoilage, pests, financial literacy, technical assistance. I'd be really interested in understanding how the research found opportunities for geomapping to help with those challenges as well, not just necessarily the kind of the assets or the pieces that you've spoken to already.
Yeah, I think your question, Thomas, really hits on the point that geomapping is not, only geomapping. In most of these services, we're seeing geomapping layered with market pricing information, weather advisory, access to inputs for crops and to fight pestilence. And that's also really important. It's this whole package of services that comes with the maps that we really believe will change the smallholder financing equation. So for example, we did see many of the applications such as Numerate, which offers direct access to buyers for fisher folk. So they can go on the app and sell their fish and shrimp directly to buyers, and they don't have to, go through a middleman, and that really helps them increase their profits. We also see that in apps like Cultiva, they were helping do COVID maps during the height of the pandemic to help farmers understand, where the hotspots, and agribusinesses also understand where are COVID hotspots to better move crops and make sure that no one's operations were as severely affected as they could have been during the pandemic using these maps. What else did you mention? Financial literacy, that's a huge issue. And Oliver touched on this, but just the importance of field extension workers. We talked to SciComp, one of the tech providers, about how much they're investing in their fleet right now, purchasing more motorcycles so they can get more field workers out there to talk more to farmers and map their fields with them, but also work with them on understanding how their apps such as mFarmPay, which is extending financing to farmers, how that really can help them get financing they need to invest in their operations and increase their incomes. Because without that kind of hands-on support to understand not only how to use a smartphone, but also what a loan means and what the terms mean and how to navigate that, people really need support. I mean, I still need support to do that. So obviously smallholder farmers need support to do that as well. So I think putting all these together, that's why the super apps that can do this are really successful in the space.
Thanks, Aaron. No, that layering of both kind of additional services and additional support services that can be provided as a result of geomapping is a really kind of interesting opportunity, I think, for kind of some systemic changes to this space. Bruce, maybe I could come back to you, maybe to speak a little bit more about some of the kind of key barriers that we identified in the research. Really we pointed towards 3 barriers. These were funding, awareness, and skills. How do you think that tech providers and intermediaries can best overcome these challenges, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I think all the presentation, as well as all the panelists, have alluded to this combined story, right? The development finance people, the technology people, the agriculture people. There hasn't been enough cross fertilization, and it's jumping a little bit ahead. But what I've been advocating for a while is some type of pilot facility to work with a handful of crop-in, Apollos, entities like this that work directly with the smallhold farmers, or provide the technology to the intermediaries that work with the smallhold farmers. Because I think until we have enough of these entities that have portfolios that exist, and as Oliver alluded to, we can look at how did they do it? How cost effective was it? How easy is it to maintain the data? How can some of that data come into the public realm? We're kind of stuck in this circular conversation, because I believe not only for smallhold farmers, but things like housing microfinance, things that are geo-specific, there's so many more benefits. The hurdle is to get through the near term, right? The midterm and long term, it's easy to see what the benefits could be, but we all have this challenge. Like, why should the intermediary pay for it if they're not sure? Why should a farmer bear that extra cost for the first year or two if they don't understand how it improves their situation? And I think this is where the development finance institutions and foundations need to get together and basically catalyze, a handful of these projects. So again, there's enough of these data portfolios that exist that everybody starts to say, oh, this isn't that hard to do. Oh, we see how it changes the credit and logistics situation.
Thanks, Bruce. And maybe, Jitesh, maybe I could pull up to you for the next question, just to build on that kind of, I suppose, ambition for that medium term or that longer term change. We can see this happening. You mentioned that cropping has worked, I think, in nearly 50 countries now and continues to grow from strength to strength. Would you be able to just to paint a picture as you see that geomapping landscape evolving over the next year or so, Jitesh?
Absolutely. There are some very critical things that we are seeing. So because we worked with 400 crops and we have signatures of that, right? We are now able to assess the viability of, maybe 95% of the total commerce that exists on agriculture. So that becomes a very significant portion on how we'll be able to drive the change and hopefully shape the future. And then one of the other things that have come out of our research shop, if you will, and by the way, I'm super proud of our data science and research team, is we've created a system that that we are labeling now as DEWS, which is a disease early warning system. Now, as a result of that, we are now able to predict 15 days in advance almost 60 diseases and a few pests as well that can afflict your crops. So that becomes a significant amount of information regardless of who the actor in the entire system is, right? Whether you're a financing organization or you're an enterprise or an intermediary working with a farmer or your farmer itself. So that becomes real innovation because, for example, almost 30 to 35%, and I believe this is a global number, 30 to 35% of crop loss exists at a farm predominantly due to disease and pests. Now imagine if you're able to predict that 15 days in advance, and as a result of that, the farmers, especially the smallholder farmers, if they are able to take any preventive measures towards that and thus save their losses, in theory, we are talking of their yield, and their livelihood going up by another 30 to 35%, right? So in addition to all the other benefits that technology can bring into the farmers, there are a lot more ag tech solutions that can really improve, that can really work on improving the livelihood of a farmer. And, for example, if you look at India, the average livelihood of a farmer today is less than $1,000 per year. Okay. So that's the magnitude of improvement we need to bring in, where, when you look at a GDP per capita of some of the developed nations, we are talking of $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. And then even within the developing nations, if you remove the farmer from the equation, the GDP per capita is $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, right? But the moment a farmer is included, that number dramatically reduces because the farmer's ability to earn money is really restricted. And that is because of the entire intermediation system that exists, because of which the farmer does not have access to information. So the moment you are able to create a utopian future, if you will, which I really believe will happen in the next 3 to 5 years, where farmer all of a sudden becomes the center. With the farmer as a center, the ag input companies, for example, your seed companies, fertilizer companies, they are coming to the farmer, right? Your farm equipment and machinery companies, they are coming into the farmer. The credit issuance companies, the lending companies, they are coming to the farmer. And then someone on the Q&A had also asked about insurance, right? The insurance companies are coming into this space. Now, the moment all of that happens and the farmer becomes the center of the universe for the agrarian economy, which surprisingly today it isn't. The farmer is not center of the agrarian economy. The moment that is enabled, through the availability of tech. And by availability of tech, I'm only talking of phones in the hands of a farmer. The moment that happens, and today, for example, a smartphone penetration in the rural parts of developing nations is almost 25 to 30%. Give it about 2 to 3 years time, and we are talking of high degrees of 70 to 80% of penetration, right? The moment all of that happens, everything comes together. I think that is when the revolution will begin. Until then, I think all of our jobs is to create the systems, create the technology, create the processes, if you will, which will enable the escalation once we get there.
Thanks, Jitesh. That's fantastic. That kind of proliferation of ag tech solutions is a really interesting piece, and I think we can see a lot of movement in that space reflected in the research. Perhaps Oliver, I could turn to you just to get your kind of opinion on how funders like IFAD are exploring this potential of geomapping technology.
Thanks, Thomas, for the question. So yes, IFAD does geomapping, but mostly in monitoring and evaluation and impact assessment. So first of all, IFAD, IFAD, we fund projects but don't implement them. So the projects that we fund are implemented by most cases the Ministry of Agriculture of a respective country. So over 60% not 60%, sorry, 60 projects, we have data of our investment sites. So this is not necessarily producer data, but it could be georeferenced roads, water points, pastures under resting. So such data we have. And we use this data basically for monitoring, evaluation, and impact assessment. So far, our projects, so a large number of projects do collect data, but it's mainly done for monitoring purposes. It is not, so there's little advanced analysis. So there's not much, let's say, apart from this reporting requirement, there's not much more that is done with the data. We are also, also this data is not necessarily shared, or it's it doesn't follow yet data standards that it can be shared. So as I mentioned in my previous intervention, data should be following standards and should be in that sense analysis ready. So what we're working on is basically setting up guidelines and recommendations to georeference investment locations. We also collect data from our projects at household level. So at the beginning, midterm, and completion, the household surveys are carried out that measure poverty and assets, and also access to finance as well. Right now it is right now, so the new generation, so the newly designed projects will use these standardized questionnaires. This data is then used to measure impacts. So we want about 15% of the projects go through an impact assessment where we compare the treatment and control boot, so we can measure the attributable impact of a project. There is a growing interest in IFAD to apply such technologies and bring them directly to the farmers. There's an ICT for new ICT for D strategy, so ICT for development strategy. IFAD has also recently employed new staff to drive this forward. And then, so in our case, the implementation modalities have to be right. So when a new project is designed, the best case that this activity is plugged in, it could be like one of the components of the new project. It's important that, of course, that the government is fully involved and is willing to loan for it. I think one of the barriers so far is that many of the solutions so far are quite early and have not are not fully developed yet. So once that, how do you say, a certain threshold is reached, I would expect that the uptake will be greater. All from my side, over to you, Thomas.
Thanks, Oliver. No, that's really interesting, and maybe that ties in to my next question, which is back to you, Aaron. I thought some of the research pointed, and I think, from what Oliver is saying there, that there are still a number of challenges in kind of making sure that this type of data, this type of information is used, in this case for the extending of finance to smallholder farmers. And in the presentation, you point to the geomapping uptake facility. How do you think that this facility addresses some of those challenges that are presented in the study?
Yes, so our idea, after seeing, all of the landscape that we saw and the barriers around knowledge, as well as just know-how, technical know-how within a financial intermediary, and capital, our facility that we're thinking about is something that would have both access to capital, so providing capital to fund some more pilot studies, helping financial intermediaries to run pilots to really understand how to use geomapping, how to use one of these providers like a Cropin to improve how they're doing credit scoring or even credit analysis for potential farmer clients, so that they can either pilot it to get a little more certainty about building it out, or if they're in the pilot stage, access the capital that they would need to build that out, scale it up across regions, or even across different types of portfolios and get to more smallholder farmers. And then the other side of that with the facility is always thinking about knowledge, education, and assistance. So thinking about different technical assistance packages that could be offered to tech providers or intermediaries to help them, number one, find each other, kind of doing a little bit of matchmaking, hosting conferences or forums where people could, banks that we spoke with that were really interested in this didn't necessarily have a short list of companies that they would love to hire to do this. They had seen other banks doing it maybe, or they had known of one or two companies in their region, but they weren't sure about another company doing it down the road that was a little cheaper. So just helping intermediaries that are interested to see what providers are out there and matching them up so that they could do that. And then finally, technical assistance on both ends to help market these solutions to more financial intermediaries, to more private institutions that maybe want to uptake these solutions, and helping those intermediaries then feel confident in implementing them by helping them with technical know-how, scientific know-how, kind of what Oliver does, translating that data. Now that you have it, how will you use it to make them feel more comfortable in using the geomapping to essentially reduce risk and increase lending in the smallholder farmer area?
Thanks, Aaron. Maybe Bruce,
Thank you.
I could turn back to you and maybe get your insights on what, as a funder, excites you about the prospect of a facility like this that's designed to support the uptake of geomapping technology.
Well, and again, a number of you who've talked with me over the past 5 years or so, I just think this is a great opportunity for development finance institutions and foundations and social funders to come together and blend our capability to do some type of hybrid pilot facility. Maybe it works with 5, 10, 15 of these entities. We're not trying to conquer the whole world as far as a portfolio. We're just trying to have a portfolio of enough of these different entities, different intermediaries, different types of intermediaries, maybe different software packages, different methods to collect the geodata. But to show, even if a few of those are highly successful, to show the marketplace what can be done. Plus, I think the other thing we would see is not only in the space of smallholders, but I think we would see DFIs and foundations realize there's much other of our financing that we're doing where this should be a requirement of our loans, because there's all the measurement stuff that comes on the back end. And two quick thoughts just to plug in here is the stats that Aaron showed in the beginning. It's clear that financing doesn't want to go here. If we can't figure out a way to get financing on a sustainable basis on each individual farmer as well as a portfolio, we've got to be able to turn that faucet on, which means we need more accuracy. And GTESH was listing out some of the great layers of being able to sift data like disease patterns and pestilence patterns that can be identified early. But just one visualization, if you think about it. If I'm an intermediary and I'm working with a smallholder and I'm not geomapping my portfolio to go along with my database. So let's say I had a portfolio of 1,000 loans. Now I could talk to my officers who go out in the field to figure out where those are, but that's time intensive. But if I only see it in a data set, I could have 50 bad loans, and maybe depending on how I price my loans, that's acceptable, but I wouldn't know where they are. But if I have the footprint of the map that goes with the table, I might realize that 35 or 40 of those loans are all clustered into one little area within my area that my 1,000 loan portfolio is in. Well, all of a sudden that becomes a different management equation, right? Wait a second, they're all clustered together, or they're all right next to each other, or they're all of a certain size, or they're all along a road. But if it's only in a data table, you can't see that. If we can't find a way it's a two-way street. We need the farmers to have better information, but the intermediaries and we who support the intermediaries need to have better information on our side to unlock the flow of finance downstream to the individual farmers. And again, I thought Jitesh was giving really great examples of once this data starts to exist and can be refined and sifted, it's like the light bulb goes off. People start to see what else we can do with it.
Thanks, Bruce. And maybe Jitesh, I might just come back to you then to pick up on that slightly. I know that that we've seen in the research that agribusinesses have been using software like Cropins to monitor both kind of highly scrutinized crops like cocoa and coffee, but also a kind of an increasing trend, I think, of staple crops like maize also being monitored. Why do you think that is the case? Why do you think we are seeing this kind of growing interest in staple crops being used?
I think there is definitely a change in the cropping pattern that is taking place everywhere in the world, right? And especially with what COVID has brought on, food security at a regional level has become extremely critical. And by region, I am now talking not sometimes even not necessarily at a country level, but even at a state level. So, for example, if you look at a country like India, where agriculture is a state mandate, India as a federal country may not necessarily be too concerned, but each state is now beginning to think, okay, what are the various things I need to do to make my state food secure? So, that is one of the reasons why we definitely believe that there is a growing need for geographical areas to begin to look at this, number one. Number two, also politically speaking, political is the wrong word. Economically speaking, what some of the countries are beginning to look at is how do we manage the trade imbalance that some of these commodity crops are doing, right? And especially, for example, if you look at rice, rice is a great crop everyone in the world needs, but with the whole emphasis on climate change and the amount of water that rice/paddy needs, as a country, should we make excess of it and hence deplete our resources, or should we make just enough where our country needs that, and then and then whatever else natural resources we have left over, should we do more of that, right? So I think those are a couple of the reasons why we are definitely seeing a change in pattern, and towards that, for example, like I mentioned earlier, we are able, since we have crop signatures for 400 crops, and we are able to definitely do through our AI and ML platforms, we are definitely able to do predictive analysis for 22 crops that constitute to 95% of the total commerce. Most of your majority crops are covered in that. And a couple of examples that we have done in the recent past is, and this is something that got published on FMN's website as well. So the flour mills of Nigeria, we were able to predict the entire wheat production for them. And our results again have been published on their website. So please feel free to go take a look, using which they are able to make some of their procurement decisions at a country level. What should they be doing for wheat? Similarly, one of the largest agriculture chemical companies in one of the, and I'm being a little vague because I don't know if I can mention their name, but one of the largest agchem companies in one of the Southeast Asian countries, we were able to detect two different varieties of rice, and basis that, what are some of the interventions that need to be brought into that country, was something that we were able to help. So a lot of these things are happening by the aid of technology and the use of technology, and ultimately that's what's needed really at the grassroots level, right?
Thanks, Jitesh. I think that example from the flour mills of Nigeria, that kind of demonstrable example of having that ability to predict their wheat crop is fantastic, and maybe that ability to predict that crop and the production of that crop speaks to this kind of trend, I think, that we also saw in the research of kind of more detailed mapping, more kind of stronger capabilities. And maybe Oliver, I could turn to you for the last question here before we turn to the questions that have been posed by the panel. as we see that this kind of specialization, this quality increases, do you think we're likely to see additional added value to both funders and farmers through the use of geomapping technology?
Yes, I think that the technology is getting better. I think that the data is getting better. We're having more and more research that will help us answer more questions. So I think that that the good news is that a lot of new stuff is being published. Bad news is we have to keep on top of things, and we have to, of course, make sure that more data is fed into this. I think that a holistic approach is important. So geomapping and assigning attributes is, of course, one side of the solution, but efforts at multiple ends are needed. So it should be packaged with other services and other initiatives. So I think that's where this technology can have the greatest impact. So together with value chain development or investments in a small infrastructure or irrigation, or also with land tenure. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. No, and a great way to finish the panel discussion. I think we have a number of questions that I can see here in the Q&A function. I have one question here from Bernard Wright, which is that blockchain hasn't been mentioned, and it seems that this is a critical technology to take the next step beyond maps. Has this been considered? Aaron, maybe I could just turn to you briefly on the research element, and then to the rest of the panel to kind of feed in if they have any additional insights. But maybe Aaron, to you in the first instance.
Yeah, so in the beginning of our study, we were looking at a few different applications, and in our overall mapping of the 100+ providers, we do have some that use blockchain. We did not focus on them in our study just because we were seeing that blockchain is a little hard to track boundaries and plots with, since boundaries change and land can be sold. So it's harder to kind of track those changes on blockchain. But again, turning it over or passing that to Oliver and Jitesh, who are probably more expert in that theme than I am, but that's kind of explaining why it's not so much in our report here today.
Thanks, Aaron. Oliver, Jitesh, any additional comments on that?
Not on blockchain, no.
And Jitesh, anything from your side?
Same here, not on blockchain, but speaking of, one of the fundamental requirements of blockchain are traceability, right? And if you are, and as an AgTech platform, and Cropin does this very well, and then of course there are a lot of AgTech players out there. The fact that we are now able to do traceability all the way from sowing to harvest to inventory management, I think goes a long way in being able to resolve some of the challenges that exist when it comes to traceability. So there are two critical requirements. One is, as a regular retail consumer, which my wife does so well, she wants to go to a supermarket, scan a packet of tomatoes, and understand, was it really organically grown? Now, you ask me, to me, it does not matter, but of course it matters to the larger population of the world, right? So, that's something that can be done through traceability solutions. And then B, more importantly, from a commerce standpoint, a lot of the growers, right, who are growing some of the export-oriented crops, for them to be able to grow it correctly, as a result of that, it does not get rejected at the port of import. That becomes very, very critical from a traceability standpoint. So a lot of AgTech solutions are there today that are able to provide these sort of traceability solutions that until blockchain comes in, or if and when it comes in, at least these are some of the substitutes, if you will.
Thanks.
Thomas?
Yes, Bruce, please feel free to jump in.
Interject a thought here. So, because I have thought about this, and I wouldn't say the formal blockchain, the formality of, but similar, if you think about those intermediaries that are working with the smallholders and they're developing technology package to do this. If they're 3 or 4 years into working with a particular smallhold farmer and that plot of land, and let's say we're maybe even 5 or 6 years into it, and there's 2 or 3 entities in that same area, and you start to think about it, and they have farmers that are next to each other. So at some point, their confidence level is going to go up as far as those land boundaries, right? If I've worked with somebody for 4 or 5 years and I've done some spot checking, and maybe there's another entity that's also working in that area, and we agree that the boundary between 2 farm fields is right, you can start to think where okay, maybe not formal land title, but some type of land registration system can be acknowledged. But you can see, it's a confidence level. Year over year of working with the portfolios, you can start to have higher degree of confidence that you're accurate where the plot is, as well as that the farmer is the one who's actually farming the field, as well as origin of the crop itself, right? But it's a process and it's a time thing that plays in. But if we don't have that, then this would all sort of be a miss, because if year over year, if we can't build higher degrees of confidence in the information we're working with, then we can't really get to more accurate portfolios.
Thanks, Bruce. Just in the interest of time, I might turn it to our next question, which, Aaron, I might pass over to you first again in response from the research. And the question is this: is there an example of a government or a public institution supporting the application of this technology? Did that come up in the research at all? And again, I'll open it up then to the rest of the panel to respond.
Yes, so we weren't too focused on government institutions. We did find in our research a few that are using geomapping just for disaster response or for mapping out, for lack of a better term, slum neighborhoods or informal neighborhoods and settlements. So we do see some governments using that. Another angle that we were looking at with governments was just on approvals and regulations, how sometimes that makes it difficult to scale across geographies because the privacy regulations or the regulations for financial institutions differ across from Southeast Asia to Latin America. They're very different. So understanding how to scale your product across is sometimes a challenge, and just getting your processes approved too. We spoke with an insurance company that is still waiting for the government to approve how it does its business to really get more insurance, crop insurance out to smallholder farmers. So no public institutions are coming to mind right now, but we did see that as a use case, especially for understanding informal settlements and disaster planning and response.
Thanks, Aaron. And I wonder, Oliver or Jitesh, have you seen any examples of public institutions taking the lead and using this this technology?
Jitesh, do you want to go first?
So we've seen, thanks, Oliver. We've seen a couple of very interesting use cases that we've been able to do. And we've done a lot in the international side as well. But let me pick on the India side. So for example, insurance as a sector in India is in the agriculture sector is mandated by the government themselves. And insurance takes place at an aggregate level, which is a bunch of zip codes or pin codes, if you will. So we work with the largest insurance provider in the world. And it is called as the PMFBY program, PM as in the Pradhan Mantri or Prime Minister. So Prime Minister Fasal Bima Yojana program. Now, as a result of that, we are able to provide through the geomapping technology, we are able to provide information at an aggregate level across 7 different states in the country, across almost 100 different districts. Now, that's a great intervention that we are seeing at the government level, which is directly impacting the livelihood of the smallest of farmers, regardless of the size of the farmer. It's having the largest impact. So that is one program that we are definitely seeing a lot of government intervention and government partnership. And then the other one is in the state of Punjab in India, we are working very closely with digitizing and enabling traceability for crops like seed potato themselves, organic fruits and vegetables, as well as basmati rice. So we are doing the digitization of it. Second, we are doing the traceability for it. And third, we are also predicting what will be the likely yield that is going to hit the market from this entire state, basis which the government is then able to make socialist subsidy measures and policy decisions basis this information. So these are some 2 critical programs that we are working in India from a government standpoint.
Thanks, Jitesh. Oliver, did you want to come in on that as well?
As mentioned at the beginning, so geomapping is carried out, but not in the sense of this study where you geomap a location and allocate rural finance services to it. What happens in our project is rather so that in retrospective that let's say entrepreneurs and financial institutions are mapped, but not as a means to in the sense of this study. Maybe, I mean, in terms of the best mapping example, and we have IFA was maybe Cambodia, where over 140,000 households have been systematically mapped and categorized, and they're receiving services and but not rural finance in that sense. So that will be hopefully a next step vision there.
Bruce, did you want to come in?
A quick thought. So, you know, the top-down approach, governments coming down, great wherever we can find that. But if you, again, this is a lender's perspective. If you think about it, intermediary that works directly with smallholders and financing as part of their package, the one piece of data you can't say isn't relevant is where that field is and its boundary. Like any lender, that is a relevant piece of information to agriculture finance. Now, there's all the big arena of legal and philosophical discussion around data protection. That's something that needs to be worked through. But my point is, with intermediaries, if they can get viable software and devices, there's no reason they can't, at the retail level, be doing that while the larger initiatives are happening. But again, philosophically, this has got to work for lenders, and you can't say that piece of information isn't relevant to a lender that's going to work with a rural smallholder farmer.
Thanks, Bruce. I have a technical question, which Oliver, I might turn to you for the first response. Is ideally, how often should geomapping data be updated, and how does this happen in practice?
Oh, it really depends what you're monitoring, right? So I guess yeah, it depends. It depends really. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer that question. No, maybe Jitesh is in a better position.
Thanks, Oliver. Jitesh, any insights or comments on that question? Maybe not. I think maybe we might have lost Jitesh momentarily. We can move on to the next question. And I suppose I just put this out.
Sorry,
we have Jitesh.
Yeah,
I certainly can. Yeah.
Okay. Look, I think Oliver touched upon the point, right? What is the degree of visibility that you want? Is the amount of information you should capture. If you typically look at it as a journey, there is the first line or the baseline digitization that needs to occur, which is understanding who the farmer is. So his name, phone number, whatever, right, is required. Second is of course understanding what are the coordinates of his farmland. So not just a coordinate, but the entire contours of the farm boundary. That becomes important. And that forms the basis of digitizing the farm and the farmer. Now, the moment that happens, then of course, the program that you're working with, what level of information we should capture. And, Cropin as an organization is working with some of the largest enterprises in the agriculture ecosystem. And depending on the program, there are those who want data to be captured every single day because they are part of seed production and seed R&D, more importantly. Then there are the food producers, the two largest potato users of the world for the French fries and the potato chips that we eat. They want information to be captured on a weekly basis. So it really becomes a function of what is your net outcome, and basis that how much information we should capture around, what were all the variety of practices that were followed from sowing to harvest, when was fertilizer applied, when was irrigation done, when was the pesticide, how much was the pesticide. So depending on the amount of information that's really needed as an outcome of the program, that is what will typically define whether you want to do this daily, weekly, or probably do it once. And, from a credit lending standpoint, per se, at a very fundamental level, the information upload is only that baseline digitization, because after that, it's all through satellite monitoring.
Well, and again, go and tag in just for a second. So if you think about a lender's perspective, right, you get the baseline as GTESH referred. You've got to get the boundary to start with, whether you're using a satellite or phone. But we're not for the most part, we're not talking about nomadic farmers. We're talking about farmers that have lived in areas for long periods, right? And village structures, social structures. Now, in any given season, a farmer might take on a piece of land. So again, this is a learning process year over year. That intermediary, the integrity, did they get good information the first go around? How much of it did they have to check the second year? Are they getting good integrity in their relationship with the farmers? Like, are the farmers telling them truth? Do they have to send an agent out to double check things? But you would hope year over year, right? Accuracy and relationship gets better and better. And then it's like any lending entity, you've got to decide how much of your portfolio are you spot checking. But it's an iterative process. Until these portfolios exist, it's hard to figure that answer out.
Thanks, Bruce. Maybe just with an eye on the time, there's just maybe 2 or 3 last questions that we try and get to. I have one that's targeted at GTESH specifically, and it's this: how can platforms like Cropin ensure that smallholder farmers benefit from their own information, the information that they're sharing?
I think there are multiple ways. One is obviously, with that information now all of a sudden becoming digital, there are a lot of ways in which your input chemical companies, your farm equipment machinery companies, your credit financing companies, in terms of what we are having a conversation today, all of a sudden that last mile ability to solve the last mile challenge has now significantly improved, because all of a sudden there is digital visibility of the farm and the farmer. So that is how agri-tech companies are able to support the smallholder farmers. B, while Cropin is not yet in that space, but if you look at some of the amazing technology intervention that the marketplace platforms are seeing, both from an input linkage and output linkage standpoint, phenomenal, right? I mean, the challenge still exists of getting the farmer onto the platform, but the moment you're able to get a bunch of farmers, and there are so many companies who are collectively at least doing this for, I want to be able to say, for 20-30 million farmers in the world. The fact that they're able to do that, they're definitely also resolving the last mile challenge for them across all of this. And then again, like I was mentioning earlier, the fact that technology is today able to predict 15 days in advance what is the likelihood of a pest or a disease to attack. I mean, to me, that is phenomenal information. I mean, even at a medical value to humans, I don't necessarily believe that exists today unless we go through a DNA sampling, right? So just the very fact that such technology exists, the question then just becomes, how do we disintermediate that information to all the 500 million plus farmers that exist in the world? And then all of a sudden we are talking of a 30 to 40% reduction in food loss. So those would be some of the ways in which I really believe technology is enabling smaller farmers. And then the other thing, purely from a credit financing standpoint, is yesterday a credit finance organization did not know whether or not the farmer was worth lending to. Today, with the availability of technology, all of a sudden, the credit financing organization knows, yes, regardless of his farmland size, he has the capability to repay me $20 if I pay him $20 today. So that then becomes a very, very critical piece in this entire cogwheel.
Thanks, Jitesh. And maybe, Erin, I might just turn to you for the last 2 questions, just with an eye on time. The first question is, from the research, are there any bright spots for financial service providers that have deeply integrated this type of information? That's the first part. And then the second part is, how are these technologies usually financed? So who normally pays, and can they be implemented in a way that is commercially viable? Did that come out from the research?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second one. Actually, that's a more pointed answer, I think. So who pays? That's exactly a question we asked in all of our interviews. Those 2 words, who pays? And what we saw is kind of what I was saying in the report. There's a big mix. So Some providers are totally self-financed and they're raising their first rounds of impact capital right now. Others are totally grant financed and are getting their first private investors right now. And so we do just see a big mix. Mostly the farmers are not paying. That was a finding we had. A few models do charge farmers a discounted price for the application or to use the application. But what we saw, and kind of we said this, was that when you're working with a business to business model, so if you're a tech provider selling to an agribusiness, the agribusiness is paying for the farmer to use the technology. And that usually works a little better because farmers are also hesitant to take on this technology because it does present a large cost. And they also might be unsure if it's really going to pay off in the long term, if this is where they really want to invest their disposable income for their farm that year. So that's kind of the question of who pays. That's what we're seeing. And then your other question, Thomas, was about bright spots, right?
That's it, yeah.
Okay, so some of the bright spots we're definitely seeing financial institutions using this. We saw it more on microfinance institutions and institutions that specialize in farmer finance. They are definitely using geomapping. Apollo is using it. Sumanati is one in India that we spoke to. They're a microfinance institution using geomapping to lend not only to groups of farmers, but also farmers individually for input procurement loans, as well as infrastructure loans to make improvements on their farms. So there is a lot of promise, and there are a lot of people working in the space. Yapu is another provider that we spoke with. They very much so work with financial institutions, helping them, number one, to digitize their data, which we saw was a challenge here, but also to really bring geomapping on even into climate financing, thinking about climate change, climate mitigation, where farmers are located, and how farmers can access climate financing through their applications. So there are definitely some promising actors and a lot of promising trends in the space.
Thanks, Aaron. Did I see you wanted to come in there, Bruce, as well?
Yeah, one quick thing, going back to the second to last question. I absolutely believe it's important through these technologies to get better information to farmers, and that will come of it. But if we go back to where we started, it was what, $170 billion gap. And again, I guess I as a lender, I have a lender's mentality. If we can't figure out how to get lenders to lend, then getting better information to farmers is secondary. The way I would frame it is, what information do we need to get to the lenders to make them more confident in working with portfolios of borrowers where land collateral really isn't going to be part of the package? So if geomapping can help us get there, I would argue that's a way bigger win for the farmers. The fact that financial entities and intermediaries are now willing to work with them on a more sustainable and a better pricing basis. It's not that the information to the farmers isn't important, but if we can't unlock that $170 billion desert that exists right now, that's the challenge.
Thanks, Bruce. I think that might be a good place to start to wrap up today's session. I know that there's a number of questions that have remained unanswered, and I'd encourage people who are interested to follow up with us after the webinar to reach out to us if there are questions that you're eager to pose. But perhaps I might just invite the members of the panel maybe to share a quick reflection as we look to wrap up. Erin, could I call on you maybe first?
Yes, of course. So again, thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Thomas, for helping facilitate this, and for everyone in the audience for coming to listen to our report as well as our discussion. I think what we're seeing is that there is definitely a lot of opportunity in this space. There's a $170 billion financing gap that needs to be filled. And there are a lot of actors in the space already, tech providers, microfinance institutions, private impact investors who are really working to get more financing out to smallholder farmers so that they can improve their incomes and ultimately improve their livelihoods. So I'm very excited about the next steps of this research. And if you are too, I invite you to please follow along with what we're doing by going to Palladium's website and subscribing to our newsletter, The Catalyst, as well as downloading the report. Everyone who's here will get an email, but I'm sure you'll also see on our social media, especially on our LinkedIn, where we are Palladium Make It Possible. We'll be dropping these in the chat, but you can get the link to the report there. And finally, I encourage you to reach out to our panelists as well as myself on LinkedIn or through email if you have further questions, because this is an ongoing conversation and it should not end here today. So thank you again to everyone.
Thanks, Aaron. Bruce, Oliver, Jitesh, any last words, any calls to action that you want to put out there?
in my case, thank you to your team at the Small Foundation. Thank you to the Palladium team and Jitesh and Oliver for joining the panel. And my wish and desire and strong hope is that in the near future, over the coming year, we can finally put together a pilot facility, and hopefully, again, a few of the DFIs, multilaterals, some of the foundations, social investors can come together to finally get this type of pilot facility launched that would have this specific thesis tied into it, along with the concept of blended finance. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today to listen.
Thanks, Bruce. Oliver, maybe I could turn to you.
From my side, thank you very much for organizing this. I found the study very interesting. I've learned a lot, and I'm really looking forward to continue working in this area. And I'm not a rural finance expert, so I'm really interested in linking GIS to rural finance. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Oliver. Jitesh, maybe I could turn to you last.
No, thanks, Thomas, for coordinating and organizing the whole thing today. Erin and the Palladium team, fabulous job with the report that you came out with. You're really trying to understand a root problem that exists around the world. So very well done to you and the team. Thank you, of course, to all the attendees. I think the good news or the hope is, regardless whether you're a B2B company or a B2C company, right? Regardless whether you're working with enterprises or regardless whether you're working with farmers directly, I think that technology is available today. Number one. Number two, and this was not necessarily 2, 3, 4 years ago, right? No one thought of technology coming into agriculture beyond a tractor, if you will, right? To all of a sudden, now we are talking of AI and ML. So the good news is technology is available. Technology is eventually becoming affordable. Access to this technology is now also a lot more possible, especially through the use of handheld devices, your mobiles, smartphones, regular Nokia 3210 phones, whatever, right? And all of that is only in the interest of seeing what we can do to improve the entire farming community, especially with the smallholder farmers. So I think there's a lot of hope and potential. And I really believe, to Bruce's point, I really believe and really hope that in the next 6-12 months, we are able to see some of this actually coming onto the production floor.
Thanks, Jitesh. And maybe just from my side, I suppose some of the pieces that came out very strongly from today's conversation and from the research, I think that this does represent a systemic opportunity for us, not only just to shift lending, but to think about how geomapping technology can be used to layer both services and support to smallholder farmers, not just necessarily for access to finance, but certainly that there is a massive opportunity there for us to create a change in the system that we're engaged with. I think there's also an opportunity for funders to blend their capacity to support advances in this space. And I think that a key part that was also highlighted across the research and in today's discussion is that the awareness of this space, both in terms of the shifting technology and the improvement of technology that was touched on by a number of our panelists, that is creating an opportunity for us to really change the way that this conversation is being had. And finally, I think that the facility which Erin mentioned and which Bruce also touched upon aims to tackle some of these challenges, and I really think that there is potential there. But perhaps as we close today's session, I just take this opportunity as well to put a final thank you to the panelists, but also to our colleagues, Gwen, Jared, and Olivia, for supporting the webinar today. And also a final big thank you to all for attending. We hope that you found it interesting and useful. As Erin and as I can see in the chat, please do keep an eye out for the report, and we'll be sure to send the recording of the webinar, as well as the contact details in an email to you shortly. And I think we are good to close the webinar there. So thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for joining.